My name is Natalie Harper, and the exact second my little sister realised she couldn't bully her way out of this happened at the family remembrance brunch she threw in my parents' house. The house she'd already listed with a realtor. When I stood up holding a manila envelope and said, "Before anyone takes another bite of quiche, I need you to see the will my parents actually signed." Her smile didn't fall right away. It twitched like a mask catching on a nail, because she thought she'd planned every detail. The funeral, the sympathy, the reading of the will, the way our relatives leaned toward her like she was royalty, the way she let my mother's china sparkle under catered fruit platters while she told everyone how some people were bitter because they didn't build a real life. She thought she'd already won. Then I nodded at my husband, Ethan, and he slid a laptop onto the buffet table next to the deviled eggs, and I said the sentence I'd practiced in the mirror for 2 weeks straight. "Bree, you can call me broke all you want, but today you're going to explain why your inheritance will has Mum's signature." From 3 days after she was sedated in hospice, the room made a sound, one collective inhale like someone had opened a freezer. Bree's rich husband, Grant Caldwell, stiffened in his tailored polo, like he suddenly remembered he had bones. My Aunt Diane whispered, "What did she just say?" Bree laughed too loudly. "Natalie, stop. This is sick." I didn't look at her. I looked at the cousins who used to ignore my texts, and at the uncles who used to joke that I was the sentimental one. And I pressed play. A woman's voice, soft, tired, filled the living room. My mother, not from years ago, from last month. "If anything happens to us, if it's sudden, it's Bree." She found the box. She found the will. "Please, Natalie, don't let her." Bree lunged toward the laptop. Ethan stepped sideways. Just enough. And the detective at the back of the room, yes, the detective I'd invited, took one calm step forward and said, "Ma'am, don't touch that." Bree froze mid-motion, her mouth still shaped around the word fake, because she hadn't noticed the badge. She hadn't noticed the second man near the doorway either, holding a slim black case like it weighed the truth. And she definitely hadn't noticed that the realtor she'd hired was slowly backing away from the hallway, like she'd just realised she'd walked into a crime scene. I looked at my sister, my baby sister, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, and I said quietly, "You didn't just steal our parents' money. You stole their last breath." And then, finally, Bree's smile shattered. 2 years earlier, if you'd asked me what my sister's favourite hobby was, I would have said, making sure everyone knew she was better than me. Bree Kaplan, technically Bree Caldwell after she married Grant, had a talent for turning oxygen into judgment. She'd glide into a room like a perfume ad, and look around my life the way people look at a messy garage. Polite disgust, a little pity, and the certainty that she'd never live like this. Ethan and I lived in a small, sunlit 2-bedroom outside Cleveland, the kind of neighbourhood where people still waved from porches and your mailman knew your dog's name. Ethan worked as a firefighter, paramedic. I ran a small perfume business out of our spare room, hand-blended oils, batch numbers written in Sharpie, labels I printed myself at midnight. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Bree lived in a gated suburb where the lawns looked ironed. She drove a white SUV that was always clean, like it had never touched weather. Grant's family money came from commercial real estate warehouses, strip malls, the kind of investments that made money by existing. Bree acted like she personally invented wealth. Every family gathering had the same rhythm. Bree arrives last. Bree brings a gift, with a price tag still attached on purpose. Bree compliments you like it's a dare. "Oh, Nat," she'd say, cheeks lifted, eyes sharp. "You're still doing the little perfume thing? That's cute." And then she'd turn to someone else and say, "Grant's attorneys are swamped. We're thinking about buying another property in Florida." My parents, Marilyn and Robert Kaplan, never liked the way Bree spoke to me. But they were old-school Midwestern in the worst way. They believed confrontation was rude, and silence was keeping the peace. So instead of stopping Bree, they'd pat my hand and tell me after she left, "Honey, you know she doesn't mean it like that." But she did. She always did. When Bree started calling Ethan a nice guy, in that tone like nice was a synonym for irrelevant, Ethan's jaw would tighten and then relax again because he loved me more than he hated conflict. I hated conflict too. That's the thing people don't understand about women like Bree. They don't need you to fight back. They feed on you swallowing it. The year my perfume line finally got picked up by a few local boutiques. I brought samples to my parents' house for Sunday dinner. My dad actually teared up sniffing one of the blends. "Smells like your mum's garden," he said, voice thick. Bree sniffed it and made a face like she'd inhaled cheap vodka. "It's strong," she said. "Are you sure people will pay for this? I mean, no offense, some people should keep hobbies as hobbies." Grant chuckled like she'd said something clever. I was 32 years old, standing in my childhood kitchen, and I felt like I was 12 again, holding a report card. Bree would find a way to mock. My mum slammed a spoon into the sink harder than she needed to. Bree lifted her hands. "What? I'm just being honest." Honest. That was her favourite disguise. Then, 6 months later, my parents got sick. Not the normal kind of sick. The kind that turns your whole family into a waiting room. Dad had a stroke first, mild. Thank God. But it scared him into taking tests he'd avoided. That's when they found the heart issues. Then Mum's fatigue turned into scans. And the scans turned into the word everyone pretends they don't understand until it's pointed at their life. Cancer. And suddenly, Bree wasn't too busy to show up. Suddenly, she was all casseroles. And prayers. And I just want to help. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe tragedy could sand down her sharp edges. But Bree didn't become kinder. She became strategic. The first time I realised Bree was playing a long game was at the hospital when my mother was admitted for complications. It was late. The fluorescent lights made everyone look slightly haunted. Ethan had brought me a coffee that tasted like burnt hope. Bree walked in wearing a cream-coloured coat that probably cost more than my car, and she kissed Mum's forehead like she was performing for an invisible camera. Then she turned to the nurse and said, bright and confident, "Hi, I'm Bree, the younger daughter. I'll need access to her charts and medication schedule." The nurse blinked. "Are you her healthcare proxy?" Bree didn't even look at me when she said, "I will be." She pulled a folder out of her designer tote. Neat papers, clean tabs, legal documents. My stomach went tight. Mum was half asleep, a morphine fog softening her face. Dad was in the bathroom throwing up from stress. And Bree was quietly laying paperwork on the tray table like this was a business merger. I leaned in. "What is that?" She smiled. "Just making sure things are handled properly. You know, since you and Ethan are so busy with your little projects. My project is keeping Mum alive," I snapped. Her eyes stayed sweet. "No, Nat. Your project is pretending you're the responsible one because you live close. I'm the one who can actually afford proper care." I wanted to slap her. Instead, I did what I always did. I swallowed it, because my mother was watching with heavy eyes, and I didn't want her last months to be a battlefield. Bree slid the folder toward Mum. "Just sign, Mum. It lets me coordinate things." Mum looked at the papers like they were written in smoke. "Natalie." I reached for them. Bree tapped my wrist lightly, like a correction. "Don't stress her out. It's standard." Ethan stepped closer behind me. The air changed. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "We'll read it," he said. "All of it." Bree sighed like we were children. "Fine. But hurry. Decisions need to be made." That night, after Mum fell asleep, I read every line. It wasn't just coordinating care. It was power of attorney, medical decisions, financial authority, access to accounts. It was Bree quietly trying to become the gatekeeper of my parents' entire lives. I confronted Dad the next morning in the cafeteria, while he pushed scrambled eggs around like he couldn't remember how eating worked. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "Bree's trying to get you to sign POA paperwork. Did you ask her to?" He rubbed his face. "She's helping. She's taking control." He looked up, eyes tired. "Natalie, please, not now." That was my father. He was a good man who believed love could fix things if you just didn't poke at the cracks. So Bree kept helping, and helping, and helping, until the helping looked a lot like ownership. When Mom went into hospice at home because she wanted to die in her own bed, with her quilts, and her sunlight, and her lilac candle, Bree hired a private nurse without asking me. She replaced the locks for security. She created a visiting schedule, and handed it out like she was running a museum. And then she started doing something that still makes my skin crawl. She'd look at Mom, drugged and fragile, and say, softly, "We should get your will updated, Mom, just to protect Dad, just to protect everyone." I told her to stop. She patted my hand like I was a nervous pet. You're emotional. Ethan wanted to move Mom and Dad into our home. I wanted it too. Bree blocked it with a smile. She needs professional support, she said. Not a spare bedroom above your Etsy lab. It wasn't Etsy, but it didn't matter. Bree didn't argue facts. She argued status. Then my father died, not long after Mum, and Bree took everything. My dad's death was officially cardiac arrest. It happened in the early morning. Bree called me, crying so hard I could barely understand her. By the time Ethan and I drove across town, the house was full of people. Paramedics, a hospice coordinator, Bree's hired nurse with a clipboard, Grant pacing like an irritated lawyer, and my mother in bed, too weak to lift her head. I ran to Mom. "I'm here!" Her eyes found mine. She squeezed my fingers barely, and Bree said behind me, "The doctor says it was sudden. Stress. His heart." I turned. "Where were you?" Bree's mouth tightened. "Excuse me? Where were you when Dad?" Grant stepped in. "Natalie, not now." I stared at him. "This is my father." His eyes went cold. "And you're making a scene." That was the first time I understood. Bree didn't just marry money. She married permission. Permission to talk down to people like they were service staff. Mum died 3 weeks later. It was quiet. Painfully quiet. Like the world was holding its breath to be respectful. Bree stayed by her bed the last 2 days, not letting anyone else alone with her for more than a few minutes. If I tried to close the door, Bree would open it, to check on things. When Mum passed, Bree collapsed dramatically into Grant's arms. I didn't collapse. I felt hollow, like grief had taken everything soft out of me and left a shell that could still walk and nod and sign forms. The funeral was warm and tasteful, and full of people who said things like, "Your parents were saints," while Bree accepted condolences like tips. Then came the will reading. Our parents' attorney, Mr. Feldman, sat in his office with a neutral expression that I now recognize as uneasy. Bree sat straight-backed, mascara perfect, hands folded. I sat beside Ethan, palms damp. Mr. Feldman cleared his throat and said, "According to the will provided to this office, the estate, home, accounts, insurance, investments will transfer to Brianna Caldwell." My brain didn't process it at first. Then it did, and my chest went hot. I heard myself say, "That's not right." Bree turned to me with practiced sadness. "Nat." Ethan's hand tightened on my knee. I could feel the fury in him, controlled and terrifying. I swallowed. My parents wouldn't do that. Mr. Feldman didn't meet my eyes. "The will is signed and notarized." Bree dabbed fake tears. "They wanted stability. They worried about you." There it was, the knife wrapped in pity. Grant leaned back, satisfied, like a man watching the end of a predictable movie. I left the office without crying. I didn't cry in the parking lot either. I cried later, at home, sitting on the floor of my perfume room, surrounded by bottles and labels, and the smell of jasmine and cedar scents that suddenly felt childish compared to what Bree had just done to my life. Not because I wanted my parents' money, because I wanted my parents, and because the last thing they'd apparently done was choose Bree. Ethan held me and said, "We'll be okay. We'll build our own." But grief is weird. It isn't just sadness. It's also rewriting. It tries to rewrite your whole past. Suddenly, every memory felt suspect. Did Mum and Dad really think I was less? Did they really look at Bree and see the better daughter? And then 1 week after the will, reading my father's old friend, Hank, showed up at our door with a small wooden box. I was cleaning out Robert's garage like he asked. Hank said, he told me if anything happened, to give this to Natalie. My heart stuttered. The box smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Inside was my dad's battered keyring and a folded note in his handwriting. "Nat, if Bree starts acting like she owns everything, go to the bank. Box 114. You'll know. Love. Dad." Ethan stared at the note, then at me. "You think?" I couldn't answer. My hands were shaking too hard, because hope is a dangerous drug when you're grieving. But I grabbed my coat anyway. The bank was the kind of place that still had brass railings and framed photos of the town from the 1,950 seconds. The manager recognized my last name and gave me a sympathetic smile that nearly cracked me open. I slid the note across the counter. "My dad said I should..." Her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "Box 114, she repeated softly. "Do you have identification?" 15 minutes later, I was in a small private room with Ethan, a safe deposit box on the table, and my father's old key in my fingers like it was a heart monitor. I turned it. The lock clicked. Inside was a thick envelope, a smaller sealed letter, and a second set of documents wrapped in plastic, like someone was afraid of time. The envelope was labelled, Natalie Original, will do not give to Bree. My vision blurred instantly. Ethan whispered, "Oh my God." I pulled out the will with hands that couldn't decide whether to tremble or fly. It was dated 2 years earlier. It was signed by both parents, and it said clearly that I was the primary beneficiary, executor, the one entrusted with the estate. There were also specific clauses. Bree would receive a smaller, fair distribution enough to prevent a contest, but not control. Any attempt to alter documents under duress would void changes. A handwritten letter from Mum and Dad, explaining why. I opened the sealed letter last, because it felt like opening a wound. My mother's handwriting was shakier than I remembered. "Natalie, if you're reading this, then Bree tried to do what we feared she would. She believes love is a transaction. She found our original draft and demanded we change it. Your father refused. We are scared. If anything about our deaths feels sudden, please don't ignore it." I covered my mouth. Ethan's eyes were wet. "Nat." I forced air into my lungs. "She forged it." Ethan's voice turned flat. "And if your mum's right, it's worse." We drove straight to Mr. Feldman's office. He didn't look surprised when I dropped the original will on his desk. He looked guilty, like a man who'd convinced himself not to ask questions. "This," I said, each word clipped, "is the will my father told me to find." Mr. Feldman swallowed. "Natalie, Bree provided a will. It appeared valid." "It appeared," Ethan repeated. Mr. Feldman's hands shook as he examined the pages. "This is properly executed. And the one you read out loud," I said, "is a fake." Feldman leaned back like his chair suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. "I need to consult," he began. I cut him off. "You need to file this with probate court. Today." He blinked at me. "This will be contentious." I leaned forward. Good, because something had happened inside me. The grief was still there, but now it had a spine. For the first time in my life, I didn't want peace. I wanted truth, and I wanted Bree to choke on it. If you've never fought a probate battle, let me tell you, it's not like TV. There are no dramatic courtroom gasps every 5 minutes. It's emails, deadlines, filings, quiet meetings in beige offices where people use phrases like undue influence and fiduciary duty, as if they're discussing the weather. And in between those meetings, you still have to do your laundry. You still have to answer customer messages asking when their perfume order will ship. You still have to wake up at 3 a.m. because your brain replays your mother's letter like a siren. We hired a probate litigator named Renee Walsh, the kind of woman who wore sleek suits and didn't waste syllables. Renee read both wills, then looked at me like she could see through my ribs. "Your sister didn't just forge a signature," she said. "She likely orchestrated a full fraud. Notary, witnesses, timing." I swallowed. "Can we prove it?" Renee smiled small, sharp. "We can if she's as arrogant as she sounds." Bree, of course, didn't take the news quietly. She called me screaming the moment she got served. "You ungrateful little leech," she shrieked. "You're trying to steal what Mum and Dad wanted." I held the phone away from my ear and stared at Ethan like I was watching a documentary about a wild animal. When Bree paused to inhale, I said calmly, "I have Mum's letter." Silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that means a predator is recalculating. "Don't do this," Bree said, voice suddenly low. "You don't want a war." I laughed once. "Bree, you started the war when you forged our parents' will." Her voice turned sweet again, and that sweetness was the scariest thing about her. "Natalie, you're emotional. Let it go. You and Ethan can't handle that estate anyway. You don't know how money works." I could feel my old self trying to shrink. I didn't let her. "I know how money works," I said. "It makes you think you're untouchable." Then I hung up. 2 days later, Grant's attorney sent us a letter threatening defamation if we continued to spread false claims. Renee read it and snorted. "They're trying to scare you into dropping it." Bree started calling relatives. She spun a story that I was spiraling, that grief had unhinged me, that Ethan was controlling me. And the worst part? Some people believed her, because Bree had money, and money makes people confuse confidence with credibility. So Renee and I built a case, brick by brick. First, a forensic document examiner. We sent both wills for handwriting analysis. Second, the notary. The fake will had a notary stamp from a woman named Pamela Rusk. Renee's investigator found Pamela worked out of a small shipping store in Bree's neighborhood. When questioned, Pamela claimed she notarized the will at the Kaplan residence, with both parents present. Problem: Pamela's own timestamp records showed she was clocked in at her store that day, and we had hospice logs that showed Mum was sedated and nonverbal at the exact time the signature was supposedly witnessed. Third, the witnesses. 2 names were listed as witnesses on the fake will people we didn't recognize. Renee tracked them down. One admitted, after a tense interview, that Bree paid him $500 to sign something at Grant's office. He claimed he didn't know what it was. The other refused to speak until Renee subpoenaed his bank records and found a deposit labelled consulting from one of Grant's shell companies. And then came the part my mother's letter warned about: the deaths. Because once you start looking at someone's fraud, you start seeing the shape of their soul. Renee sat across from me in her office and said, "Natalie, I need to ask you something difficult." I braced. Did anything about your parents' deaths feel off? My throat tightened. My dad's death was sudden, but he had heart problems. And your mum? I thought of Bree hovering, the locked doors, the private nurse, the way Mum's eyes begged me to stay when Bree ushered me out. "I don't know," I whispered. "I didn't get to be alone with her." Renee nodded slowly. "We may need to involve law enforcement." My stomach flipped. That's the thing about justice. When it's real, it's not clean. It's heavy. Ethan and I met with a detective from the county, Detective Marisol Vega, a woman with tired eyes and a voice like steel, wrapped in patience. She listened, without interrupting, as I explained the will, the letter, the timelines. When I finished, she said, "If your sister forged documents, that's criminal. If there's evidence your parents were harmed, that's bigger." I swallowed. What happens now? Vega's gaze didn't soften, but it steadied me. Now we verify. We request records. We talk to hospice staff. We look for patterns. I stared at my hands. "And if I'm wrong?" "You're not wrong to ask," she said. "People who love their parents ask. People who kill their parents hope no one does." That sentence stayed in my bones. Bree escalated when she realized I wasn't going away. She sent me a Venmo request for estate expenses. She tried to lock me out of my parents' house by changing the alarm code. She posted a Facebook tribute to Mum with a photo of herself crying, and the caption, "Grief brings out people's true colours." Then she invited the whole family to a Thanksgiving dinner at her mansion, because of course she did, framing it as healing. My aunt begged me to go. "Just keep the peace," she pleaded. "It's the holidays." I almost said no. Then Renee said, "Go. Say as little as possible. Let her talk." So Ethan and I went. Bree's house smelled like expensive candles and dominance. There were gold chargers under the plates, place cards in calligraphy, a hired chef. Bree greeted me like we were best friends. "Natalie, I'm so glad you came." I smiled politely. "Me too." Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she didn't like that I could still smile. Dinner was a performance. Bree made a toast about family legacy. Grant talked about protecting assets. Bree's friends complimented Bree's strength. Then Bree turned the spotlight, where she always did. "Natalie," she said, voice dripping fake concern. "How's the little business? Still mixing perfumes in your guest room?" I set my fork down. Ethan's hand brushed my knee under the table, grounding me. I looked at Bree and said, calmly, "It's growing." Bree laughed. "Sure, that's adorable." Grant smirked. "Maybe once this legal tantrum is over, you can focus on your, what do you call it? Your passion projects." There were murmurs, awkward smiles, and then Bree did something I didn't expect. She leaned in, voice low, meant only for me. "You're going to lose," she whispered. "And when you do, everyone will see what you really are." I met her eyes. "What am I?" Her smile sharpened. "A woman who needs her parents' money because she couldn't earn her own." My chest tightened. Old Natalie would have flinched. New Natalie breathed in slowly and said, "Bree, did you ever love them? Even a little?" Something flickered in her face. Annoyance, maybe, or contempt. "Love doesn't pay for hospice," she said. "Love doesn't manage accounts. Love is..." What poor people say when they can't contribute. I stared at her, and in that moment, she gave me exactly what Renee predicted she would. A glimpse of her motive, spoken out loud. Bree stood up to refill wine, and I did something I'm not proud of, but I'm not ashamed either. I hit record on my phone. When Bree returned, she leaned close again. "You should have stayed in your lane," she murmured. "Mum and Dad were going to ruin everything by giving it to you." I fixed it. My blood went cold. Fixed what? Bree's eyes sparkled with satisfaction. "They were weak," she said softly. "They were confused. Dad's heart couldn't handle the stress. Mum," she shrugged like she was discussing weather. "Mum was suffering." I felt Ethan stiffen beside me. I forced my voice to stay steady. "So you decided for them?" Bree smiled. "Someone had to." That recording went straight to Detective Vega the next morning, and for the first time, I saw fear in Bree. Not in her words, but in the way she started calling less, and sending more messages like, "We can settle. Name your price. Stop before this gets ugly." It was already ugly. It was just finally ugly for her. By early December, the forensic report came back. The document examiner concluded the signature on the fake will showed signs of simulation tracing, hesitation, inconsistent pressure, not natural handwriting. In plain English, Mom didn't sign it. Someone copied her. The notary's story collapsed under subpoena. Pamela Rusk tried to update her statement. Renee smiled without humor. Too late. Meanwhile, Detective Vega's team interviewed hospice staff. One nurse remembered Bree insisting on administering certain medications herself. Another remembered Bree arguing when a doctor suggested reducing sedatives so Mom could be alert. Then Vega got something that made my stomach drop. A former caregiver, someone Bree had hired briefly, came forward after seeing the legal news online. She told Vega that Bree had asked her, off the record, how long it would take for certain medication combinations to end suffering. The caregiver quit after Bree offered her cash for discretion. Vega didn't tell me everything. Active investigations rarely do. But she looked me in the eye and said, "Natalie, we're moving." And that's when Renee planned what she called a pressure point. "Your sister is hosting a brunch at your parents' house," she said. "Why?" I blinked. "She says it's a remembrance thing." Renee's expression stayed flat. "No, it's a closing thing. She's trying to normalize her ownership in front of witnesses. She wants everyone to see her as the heir." I swallowed. "So what do we do?" Renee slid a folder toward me. "We make sure everyone sees the truth first." I stared at the folder. Certified copies, forensic report, bank records, hospice logs, and the most devastating piece, a voicemail Detective Vega had recovered from my mother's old phone. Deleted, but not gone. My mother's shaking voice, naming Bree, begging me. I pressed my fingers to my lips. Ethan's voice was quiet. "Are you ready?" "No, but ready isn't required for the right thing." So we went. Bree's brunch was a masterpiece of audacity. She had my mother's table set with linen napkins and little white name cards. She displayed framed photos of Mum and Dad around the living room, like decor. She played soft piano music, like she was hosting a wedding. Relatives milled around with plates of pastries, whispering. Some looked at me with pity. Some looked at me with suspicion. Bree floated through them all, like a hostess on a talk show. When she saw me, she widened her eyes theatrically. "Natalie, I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think you'd use Mum's house like a stage," I said. Her smile tightened. "This is my house." I felt Ethan's hand at my back. Solid, warm. Bree clinked a spoon against a glass. "Everyone, before we eat, I just want to say how grateful I am for family. Grief can challenge people." She glanced at me. "Sometimes it makes people do irrational things." A few heads turned. My heart hammered, but my voice came out calm. "Bree," I said, stepping forward, "before you rewrite our parents' story in front of everyone, I need to show them something." Her eyes flashed. "Now is not. It is," I said. Ethan opened the laptop. Bree moved fast, too fast, reaching for it. And then Detective Vega stepped out from the hallway, like the house itself had grown a spine. "Ma'am," Vega said, voice even. "Don't." The room stopped breathing. Grant's face drained of color. "What is this?" Vega held up her badge. "County Major Crimes." Bree blinked rapidly, like she could blink reality away. I turned to the room, my family, my witnesses, my unwilling jury, and I said, loud enough for every corner. My parents' will was forged. The one Bree used to take the estate is fake. And I have the original. Gasps. Murmurs. A plate clinked against a countertop. Bree's voice rose. She's lying. She's mentally unwell. She always has been. That lie was old. It had worked for her before. I didn't flinch. I opened the manila envelope and held up the original will like it was a torch. This is dated 2 years ago, I said. Signed by both parents, witnessed properly, stored in a safe deposit box my father told me about. Bree's face sharpened into fury. That's fabricated. Renee stepped forward beside me. Calm, professional, lethal. We have forensic analysis, confirming your submitted document contains forged signatures. We have subpoenaed records from the notary. We have financial transfers to your witnesses. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. Bree turned on him. Don't look at me like that. I lifted my hand slightly. There's more. Bree's eyes snapped to me. Of course there is. Natalie loves drama. Not drama, I said. Truth. I nodded at Ethan. He hit play. My mother's voice filled the room, thin and terrified. If anything happens to us, if it's sudden, it's Bree. She found the will. She found the box. Please, Natalie. My Aunt Diane made a sound like she'd been punched. Bree lunged forward. That's fake. That's AI. Detective Vega held up a hand. The recording is being authenticated. Sit down. Bree didn't sit. She spun toward me, eyes wild, and hissed. You are ruining everything. I met her gaze and spoke quietly. So quietly, she had to lean in to hear me. That's the first honest thing you've said all year. Her face twisted. You don't deserve it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My parents didn't leave me their estate because I'm perfect, I said. They left it to me because they trusted me, not to treat love like leverage. Bree's lips curled. They were weak. That sentence, they were weak, hung in the air like poison. Every relative heard it. Every cousin. Every uncle. Grant swallowed hard. Bree, and then Vega nodded at a second officer near the door. Brianna Caldwell, Vega said. You are being detained, pending investigation into forgery, fraud, and interference with an estate. Do not resist. Bree's face did something strange, like her features couldn't decide which expression might save her. She tried outrage. You can't do this! She tried tears. Grant. She tried venom. Natalie. You psycho. None of it worked, because the room had finally seen her without the glitter. They watched the officer step closer. They watched Bree's hands tremble, and they watched Grant take one slow step back from his own wife. Not because he suddenly became moral, but because he suddenly became afraid. As Bree was guided toward the door, she twisted to look at me one last time. You think you won? She spat. I walked closer until we were only inches apart, and I said, steady as a heartbeat, no, Bree, I think you finally lost. And she did, right there, in our mother's living room, under our mother's family photos, with our mother's voice still echoing like a warning no one could unhear. Every smile cracked. The next months were a blur of court dates, filings, and the strange whiplash of grief colliding with vindication. The probate judge issued an emergency order freezing the estate. Bree was removed as executor. Renee filed to validate the original will. And this time, Mr. Feldman didn't look away. He apologized, publicly, in court, for not questioning what Bree presented. Grant filed for separation before the ink was dry on Bree's charges, which was both disgusting and predictable. Bree tried to paint herself as a victim. She claimed she only wanted to protect our parents. She blamed stress. She blamed me. But the evidence didn't care about her excuses. The forensic report held. The notary recanted under pressure and produced texts from Bree. The paid witness took a plea deal and testified. The caregiver's statement opened a deeper investigation into my parents' final days. I won't pretend it was easy to hear those details. There were nights I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, shaking while Ethan held my shoulders and whispered, You did the right thing. Sometimes I didn't feel like I did. Sometimes I felt like I was ripping open my parents' grave just to prove a point. But then I'd remember my mother's voice. If anything happens, it's Bree. My parents didn't get to protect themselves in the end. So I did it for them. In late spring, the probate court recognized the original will as valid. The estate was legally mine to administer, with Bree's portion held pending resolution of criminal restitution. The criminal case took longer. Justice always does. But it came. Bree ultimately accepted a plea on the financial crimes when the fraud became impossible to deny. And the investigation into my parents' deaths remained open long enough that Bree's attorneys stopped pretending she was innocent and started negotiating like people who knew the flaw was real. I didn't celebrate the way people think you should. I didn't throw a party. I didn't post online. I walked into my parents' house alone one afternoon, after the legal dust settled enough for me to step inside without feeling like I was trespassing. The house smelled like sunshine on old wood. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Mum used to cut strawberries for me and Bree when we were kids. And I cried, not because I got the house, because I finally felt like my parents' last truth had landed where it was supposed to. Ethan and I kept the house for a while, not as a trophy, but as a place to breathe. We cleaned it gently, like you clean something sacred. I found my mother's recipe cards, and my father's toolbox, and Bree's old childhood photo tucked behind a frame, smiling wide before greed carved her into something else. I used part of the inheritance to expand my perfume business. The boring, honest way. Better equipment, proper insurance, a tiny studio space with a door that locked, and a sign with my name on it. And I did one more thing, because anger can build, but it can't be the only foundation. I started a small scholarship in my mother's name for local women, rebuilding after hardship, single moms, caregivers, women restarting careers, people who knew the difference between love and control. Because this is what I learned. Some families will call you too sensitive when you're actually just honest. Some people will call you greedy when you're actually just refusing to be robbed. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't forgiving quickly. It's telling the truth loudly enough that the liar can't hide in the silence anymore. Bree spent years trying to make me feel small. But in the end, she taught me something I didn't know I needed. You don't have to be rich to be powerful. You just have to be done.